descriptions of astral vehicles and supernatural beings and their interactions with mankind. I believe the UFOs to be the powers and principalities as stated in the New Testament. And that's Ronald D. Story, The Mammoth Encyclopedia of Extraterrestrial Encounters, and an article by Sherry Steiger, London, Constable and Robinson, 2002, page 676. I found it incredible that a man with such scientific background and one who has spent many hours researching UFO phenomena should come up with such a conclusion. Story is an incredible researcher and should be recognized for his honesty and willingness to research all the facets of the UFO enigma, even the religious side. Story addressed the issues by quoting partly from Scripture that even many who wear the name Christian don't especially understand. And that Scripture is, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places." And I think the only ones that understand that Scripture are people that have done any kind of biblical study, and people in the New Age and Satanists understand that Scripture. It's not something that the average Christian understands, but could if he really wanted to, or she. The Scripture in Ephesians is stating clearly that the battle for dominion of the earth and for men's souls isn't in the physical realm, but is in a spiritual battle. There's a spiritual battle in that realm. I will examine this Scripture and others in subsequent chapters, which, on this show we'll get to one of these days real soon. In Story's case, though, it is obvious by his using the Scripture that he is convinced that UFOs and alien abduction occurrences have their roots in the spiritual realm and that they are a manifestation of that realm. By making such claims, Ronald Story proves himself to be another scientist who has come to know what many consider to be the truth about UFO enigma. It is spiritual in nature. Story is a brave man because being a scientist and making such claims has always seemed to be detrimental to one's long-term career. Okay. Testimony of Farah Yurdozu, who I've personally met. Very nice lady. Definitely not a believer in Yeshua, but a nice lady. I met her in 2008 when I spoke at the conference down in Roswell. Farah Yurdozu, if I'm murdering your name, Farah, and you listen to this, I'm sorry. Farah Yurdozu is Turkey's first female UFO researcher, author of several best-selling books in her native land, and many magazine articles in addition. Farah's theological inclinations are that of a psychic, and she claims to be a family heritage. Claiming that as a family heritage and such. Her work shows a passion for paranormal in many of its aspects. Her main attention is focused on close encounters with UFOs and alien abduction. Farah is not only a UFO researcher, but she's also a writer and lecturer, and is asked to talk at many UFO conferences all over the United States. Though Farah's views on most theological tenets are at polar opposites, the author of this book, or me, we do fall into line for the most part where the origin of these supposed aliens is concerned, as is evidenced by the following quote that Farah gave us. She gave us the answer to the question about why aliens in the form of grays, reptilians, and such fear the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, or Jesus Christ. Her quote as to the real identity of these entities, same difference, is as follows. She said, coming from an Islamic country, she said, I'm Turkish, the biggest part of my investigation is alien abduction, today and in the past. In our culture, religiously and traditionally, specific beings that we call jinns, which are interdimensional beings, have a very important place. They have been abducting people for thousands of years, but they exist before the Islamic religion. Yes, they exist in Quran and Islamic tradition. Religiously, they accept the existence, the reality of jinns, because jinns are created by the same God who created us and the universe. My personal opinion is what they used to call evil or demonic beings is the interdimensional or extraterrestrial being of today. And that was Farah Yurdozu, a Turkish UFO and alien abduction researcher. voiced during a panel discussion at the 2007 Roswell, New Mexico UFO conference. Very interesting. It's quite clear in her explanation that she is of the opinion that evil and demonic beings and extraterrestrials are the same thing. It's important to take into consideration that Farah isn't coming at this from a Christian point of view, but first from an Islamic perspective and also as a psychic perspective. The fact that she uses the word demonic shows that she has also studied the Christian view of the origins of these entities, or the biblical view, I should say. It's in some cases the Christian view, but in many cases it's not. People that don't want to believe. Her testimony is that another nail now amongst the many that have been driven into the extraterrestrial hypothesis coffin. Now we have testimony of somebody, if you've ever followed this phenomena closely, you probably have heard this name. The testimony of Whitley Strieber. Some say Stryber, but it's Strieber. Whitley Strieber has an interesting career, and it can be divided into three categories. He started out by writing horror novels. Two, The Hunger and Wolfen, which became films and brought Whitley a great deal of notoriety. The second part of his career was also as an author, but he wrote novels that dealt with what would happen after a limited nuclear exchange and such, and a couple of books got into the New York Times bestseller list. Whitley, however, is mostly known for his novels Communion and Transformation. The first was an autobiographic story of his encounters with extraterrestrial beings in the woods outside of his upper New York State cabin. Transformation was a sequel to the Communion, but it's basically a book that told about his transformation from unwilling victim of alien abduction to a person who became willing test subject for his captors, and his relationship with them. The book relates to the basic, if you can't beat them, join them scenario. Now in Communion, Whitley relates to the reader the sheer horror that he felt during his abduction experiences. He recognizes that these entities aren't really extraterrestrials, but the classic demons of old, dressed as in a new persona. Now, let's look at a couple of them here. Of what he has to say, his experiences, the fear and dread that Whitley initially felt as he was taken against his will by his visitors. Okay, here's a quote. Increasingly, I felt as if I was entering a struggle that might even be more than life and death. It might be a struggle for my soul, my essence, or whatever part of me that might have reference to the eternal. There are things worse than death, I suspected. So far, the word demon had never been spoken among the scientists and doctors who were working with me. Alone, at night, I worried about the legendary cunning of demons. At the very least, I was going stark raving mad. And he wrote that in Transformation, page 96. It's interesting how Whitley mentions how scientists and doctors never mentioned that the problem might be demonic. They were never going to mention that word, because when that word demon is mentioned, it denotes evil and spiritual. And when those two words are brought up, then naturally the antithesis comes to mind, holy and God. And those two words are frowned upon in scientific circles, and especially the word Jesus. Oh my goodness. They all shake and shudder when they hear that name, and manifest demonically. A lot of them do, not all of them. It's interesting that when Whitley contemplated his dilemma, he thought that it might be demonic, based strictly on, we're sure, on the sadistic rituals that were performed on him. In another passage, he relates to his readers, I felt absolutely indescribable sense of menace. It was hell on earth to be here in the presence of these entities, in brackets. And yet I couldn't move, cry out, or couldn't get away. I lay as still as death, suffering inner agonies. Whatever was there seemed so monstrously ugly, so filthy and dark and sinister. Of course they were demons. They had to be. And they were here, and I couldn't get away. And that's in Transformations, page 181. Whitley describes, in that passage that he wrote, the common feelings that plague most abductees in the first stages of abduction. He was paralyzed. He couldn't talk, couldn't move. The only thing that seemed to work was his mind, and that was filled with fear and anxiety. He describes that he feels the presence of the entities in his room and that they gave off an air of being ugly and monstrous, and they seemed to be filthy and dark and sinister. He doesn't really paint a pretty picture of his experience, does he? The fear that he felt fed his intuition, and he knew that something that felt this evil, dark, and filthy could only be demonic in nature. Okay, now, so we've read those testimonies, okay? I named the chapter in the book Crossing Over for an important reason, folks. We have shown the testimony of some of the very important and very influential people in the scientific realm, and also some who are not scientific per se, but are bona fide and respected UFO researchers. The testimonies that have been shown are from people who have attempted to find and study all the evidence. They didn't pick and choose the evidence that would cater to creating an opinion that fit their preconceived notion of what they thought the UFO alien abduction phenomena is. They wanted to know the truth, no matter how much it would cost them, either their own lives or in the research credibility with their peers. The sacrifice that they made by coming to the conclusion that they should not be taken lightly. The scientists that we mentioned could have lost credibility with their peers. It could have caused them to be ostracized from the scientific community. Science was and is their profession, and making waves in that community could get one passed up for promotions, positions, and possible research grants from individuals or associations. Aside from these things, there are little things that occur that hurt, like being talked about in social functions and laughed at by those who you consider your friends and colleagues. There may be some who would say that these men really didn't say much by saying that UFOs and alien abduction accounts mimic and parallel demonism, but we must look deeper into the motives of these scientists and researchers to see what they really meant when they said it, right? We must remember that most of the people within a scientific background, especially those who are schooled in and adhere to scientific method, hold to the thought that all things to be examined have to be tangible and they have to be proven repeatable in a laboratory. Close encounters with UFOs and alien abductions do not fit into that mold, although I could argue that alien abductions do because they reoccur, but they're not observable for the most part. Therefore, if one researches these things and they come to the conclusion that there are some reports that are real, they are treading on thin ice scientifically. They are basing their theories on the testimony of human beings, and as myself, the author of the book, have found out by dealing with secular researchers and scientists, they consider testimony pretty well moot when it comes to eyewitness statements, unless that person is still paying their loans for going to college for 16 years. Then you're credible. So if you want to go to college and get into debt, you can be credible in the UFO research community. For the secular researcher, things are further complicated by the fact that these things are happening, and they seem to mimic things psychic and demonic. For a secular researcher to use the word demonic is a monumental step. When this term is used, it denotes that the speaker recognizes that there is a demonic realm and that demons are involved. Let's take it a step further. Now, almost everyone recognizes that demons aren't the good guys, so to speak. They're always associated with mayhem and evil, or as Whitney Strieber states, monstrously ugly, filthy, dark, and sinister. To most, these entities are associated with Satan, being placed on a status as his minions and under the fallen angels in rank. Are you getting the picture here? If there's a Satan, then there has to be an adversary for Satan, and there is. Christians and Jews know him to be Elohim, Yahweh, or God. Now, we cannot speak for these men and women, and we wouldn't even pretend to. I don't know if they have ever acknowledged God as in a fundamental fashion. I do know that these men and women are intelligent people and that they would not have used the word demon without the thought that people would surmise that they were leaning towards some sort of knowledge in the supreme God. With this in mind, saying that a UFO and alien abduction lean to or are parallel to the demonic is as far as they dare go to say that there is a spiritual realm